Welcome to Keeping Tabs, the show that helps homeowners, buyers, and sellers stay one step ahead in today's real estate market. I'm your co-host, Zack Viscomi, and joining me today is none other than our local real estate expert, Tabitha Heit.
Hello, how's it going? It's holiday time, so that's why I went festive today. This will be airing in almost Christmas time.
Absolutely.
Today, I'm excited. I have a client of mine who is also an estate attorney and does a ton of, Nego, you can explain all the responsibilities that you have on your plate, but he's an estate attorney in the Bluebell area. So I'll let Nego you discuss what you do for a living and how you help people.
Thank you, Tab. Appreciate the opportunity to be on this podcast. My name is Nego Pile. I am an attorney in Bluebell. I specialize in estate planning. So we do wills, trusts, powers of attorney. We also represent seniors in elder law, and we also handle guardianship cases, and we can talk a little bit more about those specific areas as we go forward in the podcast.
Okay.
Thanks for having me.
So thanks for taking the time. I know you have a busy schedule, so I appreciate you taking the time to do this. A big part of my job is obviously selling homes and helping people purchase homes. And sometimes we come into a situation, whether it be someone didn't leave a will, and that will come up where someone has passed and there is no will in place. And what happens to the property when that happens? So, Nego, can you kind of talk about if own a house, I have no will, I don't have a spouse, what happens to my property?
In that situation where you don't have a will, the laws of the state in this situation in Pennsylvania will kick in, and that's known as intestacy. And in an intestate estate, the law says that your property will go to the next person in line in your family line. So if you are married, it would go to your spouse. If you're not married and you have children, it will go to your children. If you're not married, you don't have children, then the law says you'll look at parents, siblings, and then it'll go to other family members after that. That's why it's important to have a will, so you can explain and dictate where your property will go, as opposed to the laws of the state dictating where your property will go.
What would happen if you have multiple siblings then in that situation? How is that handled?
That can be a tough situation, or it can be an easy situation. It will depend on if the siblings get along, and if they get along and the property will go to the siblings, then it's just a matter of a person being designated as the administrator of the estate to handle the process of opening the estate, handling the property, meaning getting that property sold. And that's where the realtor like Tabitha would come in, sell the property, and she'll sell it super fast because that's the great realtor she is. And once it's sold, the money will be distributed to all the siblings. Now, before it gets distributed to the siblings, expenses have to be paid from the estate. There may have to be some reimbursements if one of the siblings paid for funeral services for the person that passed away, or paid any other estate expenses. Those expenses get reimbursed first. If there is an attorney that's handling the case, the attorney will get paid, and the net value that remains after all those expenses are paid would be distributed to the siblings. And obviously, taxes would have to be paid as well. Now, in a situation where property is going from a parent to a child, taxes of 4.5% in Pennsylvania would have to be paid to Pennsylvania for inheritance taxes. And that gets paid before the distribution to the siblings.
Nego, I have a question about that too. Something I never ever think about. What if your children are under a certain age, do they still pay those taxes regardless?
Yes. So it's the rate of 4.5%, or the inheritance tax rate, is based on the relationship of the individual, the beneficiary, to the person who died. And so irrespective of the age, that rate is going to be paid if the beneficiary is receiving the property or the money from the sale of the property.
And I think, a lot of times if there's no will in place and there's all these unknowns about who's going to step up and who's going to be the executor, and then maybe a lot of times I find even if siblings like each other, this could cause some friction potentially where who wants to be in charge of it all. And then there might be friction on who's gonna, are we gonna sell the house? Are we not gonna sell the house? So having a will does really help, when you go, at least you're not causing any type of friction with your family members on the stuff that you leave behind. And I find in a lot of situations that I come across a lot of people that don't have wills. And I don't know if it's a fear of death itself, if it's a fear of like how much money is it going to cost to put together a will. I don't, or I'll do it later, I'll do it later, I'll do it later. And then it just never happens. So, and I have been helping a lot more single people buy homes in this market. The average age of a home buyer has gone up significantly. We're up at 40 years old for a first time home buyer. Potentially, people are just not getting married like they used to right away. And so I'm having these conversations a lot more with clients like, hey, I don't want to be morbid, but it's something you should really think about. If do pass away, what do you want to happen with your home? And you should really call an attorney to get that drafted up.
No, that's important. And I'll give you an example. In Philadelphia, and you see this in a lot of cities, people don't do wills for a number of reasons. I've heard people feel that if they start the process of doing a will, they're going to die suddenly. There's no scientific correlation that if you do a will that you're going to die right away. If that was the case, I would be out of business a long time ago. And I can tell you confidently that all of the people that have done wills for me, they have not died right away. So we'll dispel that rumor. The second part is people believe that talking to an attorney like myself and trying to do a will is going to be expensive. Expensive is relative, but I'll ask this question. Is it more expensive to lose a $300,000 home than to pay an attorney $1,500 to put together a will? If you had the choice, $1,500, $300,000, right? So if we look at Philadelphia, we see in Philadelphia that there's a number of situations where property is not distributed to heirs. There's no will, and let's say a grandmother owns a row home in Philadelphia. This can be anywhere, but let's just use Philadelphia. She owns that row home. She has a daughter. She has a granddaughter. Granddaughter lives with her, and granddaughter doesn't pay rent. The granddaughter is not on the deed. The daughter is not living in the home. The daughter and the mother don't get along. And so grandmother passes away. The daughter, who hasn't lived in the property, all of a sudden she wants this property, and the property by all rights can go to her. But the grandmother wanted the property to go to her granddaughter. But because she didn't do a will and the granddaughter is not on the deed, the daughter is going to inherit that property. Even worse, if there are the real estate taxes have been accumulating, and let's say they accumulated for over 3 years, nobody's paying it, and the city decides, okay, we're going to foreclose on this property. Now, what's going to happen? Yeah, the daughter may inherit this property, but she didn't pay the taxes. And she doesn't care because she's like, I have no stake in the game. So property goes to foreclosure, goes to sheriff's sale, gets sold. The granddaughter and the daughter have no access to this property. It's sold to an investor, and the investor gets the property, does some rehab, sells it, makes some money. And the daughter and granddaughter have lost an opportunity to inherit this property, the loss of generational wealth. The real estate is the most expensive asset in most families. And so this daughter and granddaughter were left with nothing. But if the grandmother did a will, at least she could have left it to the granddaughter. Granddaughter could have started paying the taxes. She would have done the responsible thing, and they could have saved it from foreclosure. But we see a lot of these issues with properties in that situation, and it's called tangled title properties because the person who's living there doesn't have title to the property.
Yeah, we see that all the time, and I think it's sad. You lose someone that you love, and you're trying to grieve through that process, and then you find out you might not have a home to live in, or that and you have to get out because you're being pushed out. Or I see a lot of reverse mortgages on the property, so then it's like they have to go. Like like if granddaughter's staying there, or boyfriend or girlfriend, not married, like it gets very, very sticky when there's no will set in place.
That's right. And, in the case of reverse mortgages, when that homeowner dies, the reverse mortgage company, they want their money back. I mean, they'll give you some time, they'll give you some extensions, but at the end of the day, they want their money back. And if you're not able to pay them back, you may have to sell the house, or if, you're not able to sell the house, they have a right to foreclose on it. But, and the most important thing that families have to do is have conversations. In a lot of families, decisions are made in a vacuum, and the decisions aren't shared with children. They're not shared with other family members. So in that hypothetical that you gave, Tab, you know, a homeowner may have taken out a reverse mortgage because, they're older. They may not have qualified for a traditional mortgage. They need access to capital, for any number of reasons, for medical expenses, for other expenses. And so they do a reverse mortgage. They don't tell anyone else in the family that they've done this. And they may have been able to talk with other family members and found another way to get the money that they needed without doing a reverse mortgage. And I think it's important that family members have more conversations about their property, what's going on in their lives, especially seniors. Seniors, what I found, a number of them, hold, their decisions and hold what's going on close to their vest. They're private, and they don't like to talk about a lot of what is happening to them. But I see in situations like that, there are opportunities for family members to help them and also keep property and money in the family rather than having the state take over that money.
Yeah, and I to go back on that, it is. I do see a lot of seniors going through this. I had a property that was sold, which wasn't an estate. The person's still alive, but not very well. And when we went to sell the property, we pulled up a lot of medical debt that was liened on the property, and it's a shame because had that senior maybe asked for help or guidance before that lien hit the property, potentially an attorney could have negotiated a better payout or something like that. And at that point, before they sell the property, they just want the medical facility wants their money, and it's really hard to negotiate after that part of it. So keeping your family, and I know sometimes people go through financial issues and maybe don't necessarily want to share it with their children, but hopefully more families can get out there and just be available to maybe ask these questions of their parents, of their aunts, their older aunts, and say, hey, what's going on? And because I think a lot of times they just need a little bit of guidance, and someone, like Nego, who does all sorts of law to help people in situations like this. We're talking about estate planning, but, could be a good resource to assist with some of this stuff.
Yeah. Give you another example. Just focusing on seniors, and let's say an older person had to go into a nursing home and they own their house. Now, there's planning that I can do ahead of time to protect that house so that if they have to go into a nursing home, the house wouldn't have to be sold, that there wouldn't be a lien placed on that house if that senior needed Medicaid benefits to pay for their long-term care. But it doesn't cost anything to talk, right? I tell people, have the conversation with me. It's not going to cost you anything. At least you walk away with knowledge and information. What you do with that information, then that's up to you. But if someone comes in and they have a conversation with me early on, and we say they're in their mid-60s, maybe early 70s, and they own property, and we look at their health situation, and they have a history of Alzheimer's, dementia that runs in their family, that's going to cue me to say, hey, let's do some long-term care planning. Let's try to protect this house so that your children, your family, you can leave something to them. You can have a legacy that lives on. You can pass this property on to your family instead of having this property go back to the state after you pass away. And that's the planning that I can do. I can sit down with them, protect this house using the laws that are in place right now to make sure that their home is never a consideration for them losing it or for a lien being placed on it. And if they're able to do that, just imagine the difference that will be made in their children's and their grandchildren's life if they inherit a property that's worth $300,000 or more. That's a difference maker versus if that property, and it's not protected and a lien has to be placed on that property because that senior went into a nursing home, ran out of money, the state paid for their care through Medicaid, and then when they pass away, there's a $300,000 lien because that's how much was paid for their care, right? Family doesn't have that property. That goes to the state. And so I think that's where the discussions are important, discussions between family members and, a conversation with someone like me who represent seniors and elders in having, or at least giving them information, useful information that they can then make an informed decision.
I'm curious, I'm married, I'm young, I've got young kids. My wife's name is on the deed as well. If something were to happen to me and I were to pass away, you're saying that it would basically transfer over to your spouse. But what happens in the fact that she doesn't work? There's all this other stuff in there that plays into it. I'm guessing at some point then the house isn't necessarily protected if she's got to pay for other stuff and I don't have life insurance. So can you talk a little bit about, joint people on a deed and what happens even if an older couple and one of them passes away?
Yeah, it's a great question. And so the important thing is that both you and your wife are on the deed. And then the other conversation, if you came in and you and your wife came in and had a conversation with me, we'd talk about all of the things that you just mentioned. So one of the things that we would want to make sure that you do is that you get some life insurance, both of you. Typically, the life insurance should be there for. It should be there to cover the expenses should one of you pass away or both of you pass away. And the expenses would be the expense, for the home, the mortgage, as well as your children, right? Making sure that there's money there, when they go to college or any post-secondary school that they go to, that there's enough insurance there to cover that. And then you have a buffer, for the unknowns. And my job is really to make sure that you're protected. You're protected during your lifetime, right? So we start there. And so we make sure that if something happens to either of you, whether it's a disability or some interruption, that there is some mechanism to keep things going, keep the lights on, and a plan to pay for expenses that you have, your daily expenses. And also to make sure that the financial burden isn't felt by the surviving spouse and the family. And so there's that planning during lifetime, and then there's planning, for death. And so we want to make sure that at the end of the day, you've got a plan in place that looks at all of those financial situations and there's coverage, for them. And also making sure that there's someone there to make decisions for you if you become incapacitated through powers of attorney. Powers of attorney are often overlooked by people when they hear estate planning. People tend to go right to the will. It's kind of like, when you play Monopoly and you try to, get right to go, or pass go, and don't look at all the other, stops along the way, right?
You just want to go and buy Boardwalk? What's the most expensive one?
Boardwalk and Park Place.
Yeah.
You just want to go right there.
Straight to the
your
blue.
eyes light up. And you want to collect, what is it, $200 every time you pass go, right? But we've got to look at what can we do to protect ourselves, right? Before we start talking about wills and trusts and all those things. And the power of attorney is the most important document in the estate planning portfolio. Everyone should have a power of attorney. And the power of attorney allows someone to nominate another individual to act on their behalf and make medical and financial decisions for them if they're not able to do that for themselves, whether they're in a coma, whether they're in a vegetative state, or some level of incapacity. We want to make sure that life continues, right? And minimize the interruption as much as possible. And for your kids and your children, we want to make sure that there are people nominated who can step in and be guardians for them. Because imagine if you didn't do that, if you didn't nominate someone and something happened to both you and your wife. The courts and the state will determine who's going to be your children's guardian. That's the most powerful decision that you do not want to give up. Estate planning is about making decisions and making sure that you have a plan that will survive incapacity or death.
I just think so many people are freaked out and they just don't do it. I don't even know if it's the money thing. I think, I just think it's people are like the thought of thinking about your life beyond this it's a hard thought for people to think of. But when you're I did my will very early on. I probably need to update it at some point, but I've updated it twice, over time, but I probably need to update it again. But, for me, it was, I have a special needs kid. I had to plan for, the what ifs. Life insurance was important for us because, I mean, if God forbid one of us is not here, our kids are not really going to have money. If we don't have a life insurance policy, they won't have much. So that was important. And I advise on the life insurance. When I was younger, it was a lot less. I had to add on more to my husband recently, and it was a lot more. So doing that, and I always tell people, you're younger, you have a small family, at least give enough to cover the house so that your house isn't taken away, spouse. So, but I just think a lot more people, they say, yeah, I'm going to call somebody. And I don't know that they ever do. I sit at the closing table, we start talking about these things, and, who knows if they ever get down to it. What are the stats, Nego? Do you have any idea of the percentage of people that have wills?
I don't have the stats, but I'll tell you this. It's a small number of people. If I look at the estates, the probate, decedents estates that I handle in my office, we handle a significantly large number of estates where people died without a will. And I can tell you, the majority of those situations, the survivors end up arguing.
Yeah.
They end up arguing. And a large part of what I do in those situations is I am acting like a shrink. And I'm, listening to one side badmouth the other side and trying to make sure that they understand the process and talking them off the ledge and just to make sure that we keep the process going without having to end up in court to fight an unnecessary fight. And sometimes it will end up in court. Sometimes it's inevitable. The disagreements between family members are just so big, right? And so to your point, Tab, people, when they think of estate planning, they think they have time. And they also don't want to necessarily talk about that around the holidays, right?
So, yeah, I think, obviously heated emotions happen when someone has passed away. Some families are great. Some families get along fine. Some families are like, they know that, big sister is going to take over and, take care of it all. But then there's a lot more times than not, I see it just causing fights. Who's cleaning out the property? Who's going to put some money out to fix the property? Who's going to be responsible for showing up to, sign documents? And then figuring out what money's left. And then there's always the fight we get as realtors because we're at the closing table and they're like, hey, inheritance tax. I didn't know we had to pay that. Pennsylvania, and we get a lot of people from Jersey that don't know that Pennsylvania has inheritance tax. So then they're all angry and they're looking at the realtor and the title company like it's our fault, that that money has to be paid to the state, but it's just the rules, it's just the rules of how it all goes. So there's all these emotions. So when you have a will, you have a plan, you have, this is what's going to happen. It just makes a ton easier for your family and your loved ones.
It does. And the other thing is, the other benefit of talking to an estate planning attorney is that there are ways to reduce and even eliminate the inheritance taxes. right? And so to your point, people, living in Jersey, where, in New Jersey, the inheritance laws are different. And they come over to Pennsylvania and they see that they have to pay this inheritance tax no matter what, because there wasn't any pre-planning. Yeah, they're upset, but it's not, it's poorly directed at the realtor and the title company because you have no hand in that.
Right.
Really, the person who passed away, there are things that that person could have done during their lifetime to reduce or even eliminate those taxes. And so, if you, look at, 4.5%, and you look at a, let's say a $500,000 property, and my math is going to be wrong.
I
So
got my
you
calculator
you
if
got to
you
back
need.
me
All
up on
right.
this.
What do we need to figure
Yeah,
out?
4.5% of 500,000. I mean, I think
4.5?
4.5. Yeah. I think it might be
Yeah,
like
$22,500.
22,500, right? So 22,500 in taxes. Imagine if they did some pre-planning. They went to an attorney and the attorney did a plan for that person so that that house would be removed from their estate. There would be no inheritance taxes on that property. That 22,500, that, if I got 22,500, there's a lot that I could do with that.
Yes.
Right? So if there's a way to do that, I think the conversation and the planning is worth it. And I'll tell you, you're not going to pay an attorney 22,500 to put a plan in place to accomplish that. Right? So, but people, I think there's a lot of misconceptions about estate planning. People think that you have to have a lot of money, you have to have a big estate, all those things, right? And attorneys are going to charge a ridiculous amount of money to do this. And then there's also, people just don't make it a priority. And
They keep thinking, I'll do it. I'll do it. I'll
Yeah.
do it. And then they don't do it. And yeah, I think there is a misconception of like, no, I don't have much. I only have this house, this small house. But the reality is that that small house in Philadelphia could change your kids or grandkids' life to have it, to be able to gain that and have no mortgage and have a place or use it as an investment property for income could totally change their life.
Yeah.
And I just, I wish more people would do it because I just think their families would benefit so much from gaining a property. That would be a huge leap for someone to have a place, free and clear.
Absolutely. I mean, it's one family that we did some planning for. I had represented the father back in like 2008, and he passed away recently. It was 2023 that he passed away, and his house was paid in full. There was no mortgage. He had 5 children, and he left this property in trust for the benefit of the children and grandchildren to enjoy. He also left some money so that property taxes and expenses, for the home could be paid. And that house was there for individuals to live if they needed respite or for whatever reason. They could move into that property. And basically, it's a house for the family. And, no one in that family has to worry about homelessness because there's enough money in the estate to cover expenses. And this is a property, if they continue to do the right things, they can continue to pass this property, on in the family for many generations. There's the Rockefellers, right? So the Rockefellers, John D. Rockefeller, right? He took his money, he made millions, right? Millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. And he made sure that their money was put in trust and continued to be in trust for future generations. That trust still exists to today, and it's there to benefit his great, great, great grandchildren. And there's so much money in that trust that there's probably about another 10 to 12 generations that will be able to benefit from that trust being put in place. And they set it up in a way that there will be money continue to be invested into that trust, that family trust, so that it can continue. But there's nothing that says that the average person would not be able to do that. Like this case that I just gave with that family, where the house is in trust for the family. They don't have millions. The house is a typical row home in Philadelphia, probably $300,000 at best. But there's enough money in there to keep it going. And each family member, each child, has a responsibility to contribute to that. And so it's relative, right? Planning is relative to where you are. And the place that you have in life financially. And so it doesn't have to be this immense wealth. It just has to be a well thought out plan that can be carried out. And there is a opportunity to make sure that in the case of real estate, that there's money there to fund expenses and so forth. But people don't talk about this enough, and so I think this, conversations like this is helpful to at least, make sure that people have the information and can then follow up, right? Either talking to
I mean, if we could just get a few people to listen to this inspired to call an attorney, call Nego, and discuss. There's no obligation to do anything. Just discuss where you're at and, make a plan if you want. At least see what that plan would look like. And hopefully more conversations like this, and just more, I wish in school like they taught more things like credit management, like the like important stuff, but these things just get lost in the shuffle. People get busy. People, you don't know that you're going to get hit by a car and your whole life is changed, or it's unfortunate, and people just don't want to think about horrible things like that. But the reality is, we have to. We're all going to die at some point. The question is when. So, let's make plans to make sure that our most valuable asset, our home, if we own a home, is protected for the ones you love. And you don't have to have children, to do that. But if you want to pass it along to whoever means something to you, or pass it on to a charity, or pass it on to whatever meant something to you in your life. So hopefully more people will be inspired if they hear us, Nego.
Yeah, and look, this is the thing, right? People will purchase their favorite coffee every morning, right? And I don't know what the average costs, right?
It's a lot. And I've stopped purchasing it because it's like $6.50 or $7 when you go out of Starbucks, for coffee.
Insane.
So I've been making my coffee.
Right. That's insane, right? But people will do that without
Thinking
giving it a second thought, right? But I mean, add it up over a year. I mean, if you did that, $6 a day, right?
Mhm.
And let's say they there's 30 days in a month, $180, and then you multiply that by 12. I don't know.
It's about
20.
It's $2,000.
136. And that was a cheap coffee, because that's like assuming you're not going to get a little snack when you're there.
Right. I mean,
then you're over 10.
Right. And so you spend that in a year, or people spend that in a year. And then, you look at it, and if you go to an attorney to put a plan in place that's not going to cost quite that much, but, let's say it's somewhere in that neighborhood. I mean, you kind of put it in perspective, and it's like, what's more important, getting, that overpriced coffee that you can make yourself, or protecting your family, right? And so the most important thing, in people's lives are the people, their family, their spouse, their significant other, children. And then, when you go down the line of, things, possessions, property, real estate is there. And so, we never, go out the house, in 15-degree weather in a bathing suit, unless, you're crazy.
There are some people that do, but
Right. Yeah. But you kind of put on a heavy coat, you get prepared, right? And so that the mindset has to shift, where we are looking at what is important, How do we protect those things that are important and the people that are important in our lives? And if there's a missing gap, what do we need to do to plug that gap, right? And so the conversation starts with, something like this, a podcast. It may touch somebody. If it touches one person, that's a win. My goal is to inform and educate as many people as possible, just in ways that they can plan and the impact that planning makes. We should all continue to try to learn. I'm still learning. And when I learn something new and I think it's something beneficial, I share. I share.
And I think it's not like you do these things when you're healthy, ideally, when you have all your bearings with you, when not when you're like, on death's door and you're not really thinking clearly. And it's like, if we were all to plan, earlier, it would also be helpful. And things for Nego is like, he's also not just dealing with the deceased, he's also dealing with people that, get Alzheimer's, get very ill all of a sudden. And what happened, that each one of us probably has a family member who's not medically well. Maybe medical expenses haven't been paid. Maybe liens are starting to go on the house. Maybe, and if you get someone involved earlier, like Nego, he can help protect you, so that it doesn't hurt as much, right, Nego? I mean, like, those are situations where you could step in as an attorney and help guide to make the right decisions for a client.
That's right.
I think that's an important distinction here too, that we should probably touch on at least briefly, right? Is that I know, even, growing up and coming up here as a young adult, like, my idea of estate planning was that it was meant for old people or people who had already passed away. Right. And that was the idea. And so it's like, well, I can do it later. I can do it later, Tabitha, like you were talking about, right? It's like, I can do it later. But even in this conversation, like, realizing even more and more how important it is to do it sooner rather than later, because, you give up control the longer you wait. And so, like, if my wife and I were both to pass away right now, my kids aren't old enough to take my estate. Like, my house, it can't go to them. They're not old enough. And then it just sits there until they turn 18, and then they get everything as soon as they turn 18. I'm like, I don't want my 18-year-old to just suddenly have access to all of that. Like, that sounds kind of crazy. So it seems more and more as I hear you talk that, like, this is something that everybody should really be doing right away. And it doesn't matter your income level. It doesn't matter your family situation. Like, it's really important to do if you want to be in control of the hard-earned money and assets that you've been able to accumulate and work so hard for, right?
Yeah,
that's well said. And so two things that you both touched on. The first, when someone becomes incapacitated, if they are incapacitated, medically and legally incapacitated, they cannot make decisions. So at that point they cannot create a will. At that point they cannot sign a power of attorney. And at that point, if they've not done any of those things, you then have to go to court for someone to be appointed as their guardian to make those decisions for them. And going to court when someone's incapacitated, it's very intrusive because you have to make a case that person is not able to make sound decisions, which means that you have to put on medical evidence that person is incapacitated. And you have to get into all the details of how that person is not able to help themselves, i.e. that they are defecating on themselves, that they are not able to get out of their bed on their own, they're not able to feed themselves, they're not able to get to the bathroom in time. And nobody wants that information to be disseminated in open court. There's a dignity part of it. And so if that person had set up a power of attorney before they became incapacitated, there wouldn't be a need to go to court and air all of that. They would be protected. And it also, court costs money. When you have to hire an attorney to go to court, it costs a whole lot more money than to put a power
than to just set it up.
Right.
Yeah.
And then, just on, point that Zack was making in terms of, if parents pass away before their children turn 18, and there's nothing in place. He's absolutely right. They can't inherit that money when they're under 18. So that money has to be put in trust, or that property has to be put in trust for them. And yeah, they get a windfall when they turn 18. I know when I was 18, I was not good with money. And if I got a windfall, it would last probably about a day. And so, you put a plan in place, and you have a trust set up, for young children that are under 18. And that money and that property will be there to be used wisely, to pay for their education, to pay for any emergencies that they have to deal with, pay for a wedding, pay for their first home, and then they get to call up Tabitha. Yeah, and so, a lot of bad decisions can be avoided. You can protect people from themselves with, the right planning. So, people often ask me, when is the right time to do planning? And the right time is now, whether you're 18 years old or you're 80 years old. And the other thing is this, right? Like, my son, he's a senior in high school, so he's getting ready to go to college, next fall. And when he turns 18, his mother and I, we will not be able to just go into the doctor's office and get his medical records. He's an adult. As much as we pound on the table and say we're his parents, we gave birth to him, we spent $1 million on him over his lifetime at that point.
It doesn't matter, right?
Doesn't matter. So one of the things I try to tell folks as they're seniors and children who are seniors in high school, get a power of attorney. Have them do a power of attorney when they turn 18. The day they turn 18, have them sign that power of attorney giving you access to their medical and financial records. Something we did for our daughter, she's 25 now. We did that when she turned 18, and we'll do for our son when he turns 18. But I've heard the stories. I mean, medical crisis happens. 18-year-old child ends up in the hospital. Parents go to the hospital. The 18-year-old makes a certain decision medical decision that the parents disagree with. Doctors are like, we have to listen to the 18-year-old, So the time for planning is now.
Well, Nego, I really have enjoyed this conversation. And I think if I could ask one more question as we've sort of gone through all of this is and you said, the time is now, but how would you kind of summarize everything we talked about? Like, what would be a final message to our listener today to kind of wrap all this up?
Prioritize the most important things in your life. And as you prioritize your family, your children, your spouse, your significant other, think hard about whether there's a plan in place for them. And if you have a question as to whether there is a plan in place for them, do something about it. Don't just sit and wait. Sitting and waiting is not going to solve the problem. And I know people like to go on the internet, ChatGPT. There's a lot of misinformation that comes from there. It's better to talk to a professional. Doesn't have to be me. There's hundreds of attorneys that people can talk to. But talk to a professional and get the information and then make an informed decision.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Tabitha. Thank you, as always.
Yes. I'm glad to bring on Nego to this. Obviously, it's just so important and it gets overlooked a lot. Hopefully, we've inspired one person to set a plan and make a plan. So hopefully that's what today we accomplished.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Well, that wraps up today's conversation on estate planning. So again, big thank you to Nego for breaking down a topic that feels complicated or sometimes only necessary for the elderly and wealthy. We know now that that's not true. And so thanks again for showing us really a clear path on how we can protect our home, our assets, and really the people you love. So thank all of you for listening once again. If you found this episode helpful, we ask that you please like, share. There could be somebody out there, maybe another family member who needs to hear this, so please do that. And as always, if you are looking for more information, you can reach out to Tabitha. You can reach out to Nego or a qualified estate planning attorney as well, and continue to keep tabs on the things that really matter most. Cheers.
Thank you. Happy holidays.
Thank you.
Happy holidays.